Okay, in this video, I will talk about another important topic that is very simple but important at the same time. Obviously, this is about naming resources and how to basically follow the best practices into naming these resources. It might not be the most exciting topic or anything, but trust me, this is very important. And also, once I'm done with the naming talk, I will just quickly mention how you can reference resources in your configuration and why you may need to reference those resources in your configuration. Now, it's obviously no matter how simple or complex your configuration will be, at some point you will need to refer to other parts of your configuration. So being able to do that easily and clearly is very important to make sure your configuration is clean and readable. But actually, which is more important than that, being able to actually reference these resources in the first place is more important as well. This is why I think the naming topic is very critical for Terraform. And Terraform more than other platforms because it heavily, and you will see that it heavily depends on these names. So in Terraform, there are two concepts of resource names. There are the configuration resource names. At least this is how I would like to call them to distinguish from the other names that I will talk about in a moment. And basically, these are the names that you provide when you are creating your configuration, right? And basically, there are three pieces of the name here. First of all, you have the resource or the type of the block that you're defining, which in this case is a resource. You may have a module here instead, or you may have a variable. But then our block here is resource. This is the first part of the name. Then we have the resource type, and in this case it is compute engine instance. And finally we have the resource name. This naming convention or structure, it's a structure rather than convention, is static in all of the Terraform configuration. So you see from the example here that I have a resource of the type compute engine, and the name of that resource is Flask app 1. This is how Terraform identifies this VM in its state database. So it will always refer to that with this name. However, in terms of how GCP identifies the resources, it is obviously not through this part of the configuration. For GCP, we have to name the resource through the appropriate naming attribute for that resource, which is, most of the cases, it will be name. So you will get a name as a property of the compute engine instance where you can type your name for that VM. And the name that you specify here must follow GCP's own naming convention, meaning that it must not start with a number. It should not contain spaces. It should not contain underscores. It must follow whatever naming convention put by GCP. This information varies from platform to another, and this information should be accessible to you through the documentation provided by Terraform or the vendors or the providers provided by Terraform. And in the case of GCP provider, you will get that through both GCP's own documentation and Terraform documentation as well, which is the page that you're seeing here. So you just find whatever resource that you have. In my case, I want to go for compute engine. And in compute engine, I want to find the compute engine instance, which is this one. And you will see all of the properties for this resource, including the name property for that. So this is how you find the various attributes and properties for a specific resource. This page is very handy and very useful. We are going to come back a lot for this page because we need to get these values and these attributes. So just make sure that you keep this in mind every time you need to get some information or anything about the Google provider in Terraform. Now with that previous sort of introduction, I want to go into how you can use this to refer to various resources and objects within your Terraform configuration. So remember again that this naming convention is how Terraform sees things, right? It refers to resources by their resource type and resource name. So it makes sense to use it by you as well to refer to whatever resource that you want. Now, in your case, you will just use the resource type here, and then or make a dot and then the resource name. There are some changes to this later when you start using modules, but let's just keep that point to when we come to modules later on. Now you just need to know that if you need to refer to any resource, you just use the resource type dot resource name. Now, one of the very common things we will do later is to output values to the console, to the command line interface. These outputs are done by referring to the resource that we want to output its information and select an attribute from the attributes it has. So let's assume that we have created this compute engine instance and we want to know its name and its IP. So we will refer to that again with this format. So resource type dot resource name, but we will add another dot and add whatever attribute we want. So maybe dot name and dot machine type and dot zone, for example, so that we can get this information output for us in the console. Now, another thing is when we want to delete a specific resource in our configuration, instead of deleting the whole configuration and redeploy it again, just because we want to delete that specific resource, this is then doable by just referring to that resource by using Terraform destroy. So this is really useful. So we don't just delete the whole environment if we just need to delete a single VM. Again, if you want to delete this VM while we want to keep the VPC network and the subnet, we don't really need to just delete everything, right? Because there are some other services that are using this subnet that are not managed by Terraform or that are not managed by this specific configuration. So instead, we can just tell Terraform to destroy this specific resource by referring to that specific resource in Terraform destroy. Now, I don't want to make this a longer video than what it is right now. So I hope you are now familiar with how naming work in Terraform and how to refer to resources in Terraform. The last point that I want to talk about is just a quick highlight on one of the best practices to name the resources in Terraform. Now, obviously, when it comes to best practices, I can't just keep talking until tomorrow. I have been talking about best practices in general for GCP for the last 5 years or something. But again, just to limit my scope and to save your time and all with this video, I want to talk about 2 points only. First of all, when it comes to naming resources, use a naming convention. Don't just name resources randomly. For example, if you are creating some configuration for multiple VMs, don't just name the first VM VM1, then name the other VMs something else like a standard VM or second VM or app VM or whatever. Either name them by their app names or by their role or just by whatever something uniform that you need or you must commit or you can commit to in the whole configuration and in the project. At the same time, follow the same approach when you want to name the actual resource in GCP. So as you can see here, I'm not exactly following the best structure here, but I have a VM called Flask app 01 or -1 or _1. And then the VM name in GCP, also it's reflecting the role of the VM. So just pick up something, stick to it and follow through with the rest of the resources. And later on, I will show you in this series how to make the GCP resource naming process much easier and much smoother by implementing variables. And you can define your naming convention before you start to implement anything actually, which is one of the great things about Terraform as well. The other point here is that make the resource name only contains the resource name. There is no need to also include the type of the resource or any additional information because the resource type is already described, right? Again, this is the beauty about declarative language. You define the type of the resource and then you name the resource. It doesn't really make sense to type GCE underscore or compute engine underscore or even VM underscore. You're already having this information mentioned here. So just keep it one word, or at least something very short, very clear, very direct, that this is app 1VM or Flask app 1VM or whatever direct thing that will not make you or anyone else confused whenever you want to get back to this configuration. Well, that's it. We'll see you in the next videos when I discuss more important Terraform basics and concepts.